The swamp remembers its own. This is whispering narratives where the dark doesn't hide you. It hunts with you. The law was after me, but something else got there first. The sirens were already fading when Elias Wren stumbled into the mire. Each step tore loose another memory. Blood, headlights. The man with the yellow eyes outside the roadhouse whispering. The swamp remembers its own. Now the words echoed with every splash of his boots. He'd thought the bayou would swallow him. Instead, it watched. Fireflies hung motionless, as if afraid to move. A crane burst skyward, white blur through moon steam, and for a moment he thought it was a soul escaping. Maybe his. They can't find me out here. He said it to the mud. But the mud breathed back, somewhere behind him. Dogs, bloodhounds, angry and hungry. Between their barks he heard another sound, low, drawn out, impossible to tell if animal or memory. Elias looked up. The moon was rising, drowned in mist so thick it seemed underwater. His hand shook. He touched his side where the bite still throbbed beneath a makeshift bandage. Heat pulsed under his skin like something alive. He pressed forward, half blind through the cypress. Water sucked at his legs. Mosquitoes formed a halo around his head, their buzz turning to a high-frequency whine in his skull. Then the pain spiked, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. He fell to his knees. In the reflection below, his face rippled, once human, then not. The water shimmered as though something beneath it moved in time with his pulse. He splashed it away. The reflection did not vanish. It smiled. "Run, Elias." It whispered back. Gunshots, voices. The lawmen had reached the edge of the bayou. Floodlights cut through the trees like artificial moons. Elias lurched to his feet and ran deeper. Roots caught his boots, branches tore at his shirt. Something inside him snapped in rhythm with the breaking twigs. Bone, tendon, sound of teeth grinding against bone. He didn't scream at first. He howled without knowing how or why. The dogs stopped barking. The men stopped shouting. Only the swamp answered. Its voice a chorus of insects cut in half by silence. He reached a half-sunken airboat choked with vines and climbed aboard. Inside lay old gear, a lantern, a knife. He lit the lantern with trembling hands, and the swamp recoiled from the light. Steam rose off his skin like fog. Sweat or something else glowed faint crimson. He leaned over the side and saw his reflection again. The eyes were wrong, animal. The reflection moved first. "Help me." The lantern flared, somewhere in the dark water. Bubbles rose, slow, deliberate, like breathing. The bayou was alive, and it had decided to watch him change. He heard the lawmen's voices closer now. "Fan out." "He can't be far." Elias shut the lantern off and backed into the fog. His body itched under the skin as if new muscle pushed through old. His heartbeat merged with the hum of the swamp. One and the same. A dog yelped. A man cursed. Something splashed. Then the night went still. Elias did not see what happened. He didn't need to. He smelled the blood before he knew he wanted it. He fell forward on all fours. Hands sank into mud, nails lengthening. The moon burned in the sky like a signal, and somewhere inside him a door opened. Every locked door breaks tonight. The fever didn't begin with heat. It began with remembering. The roadhouse jukebox had been chewing on the same two songs all night. Steel guitar dragging like a chain. Elias leaned against a crooked neon sign, bandage showing beneath his jacket, pretending the ache in his ribs was just a bruise from a fight he barely won. Then the stranger turned, and the room turned with him. Yellow eyes. Not bright, old, like swamp lights that know where the bodies are. "You run," man had said, voice low enough to hide in the bass line. "But the swamp remembers its own." Elias laughed then, the kind of laugh men use when every other choice is weakness. The stranger smiled and showed nothing like teeth and everything like hunger. Back in the present, the insects fell out of the air like rain that forgot how to be water. Elias blinked, and the roadhouse returned. Its mirror over the bar, the smeared shapes of men, his own face split by a light that wasn't there. "I'm not here," he told his reflection. The reflection agreed, then licked its lips. He should have left. He should have gone home, confessed, slept. done anything except follow the stranger through the back hallway into the ice room with its breath like a ghost choir. Silence twos. The bite came simple as a handshake, a grip on the shoulder, a lean, a sound like a fishing line snapping, and then warmth spreading in a circle that did not stop. The swamp answered that memory with a ripple, and the fever stood up inside him. He staggered off the airboat boots, sinking. Cypress knees rose around him like the knuckles of something buried, trying to pray its way out. The moon bled through moss and made church out of rot. His skin tightened, then slackened, then crawled. Beneath it, bone rolled like storm surf. He grabbed a root to steady himself and felt his fingerprints vanish against the bark. Slow, he told his body. Slow, his body refused. Nails thickened. No romance in it, just pressure like splinters growing backward. Joints popped with the cheap violence of bottle caps flicked against a curb. His jaw ached, front to back, and when he tried to breathe, his throat answered with a new shape that didn't like air much. He coughed. The cough arrived on 4 sounds instead of 1. He smelled the dogs before he heard them. Wet rope, old leather. Fear, not theirs. His. Another memory hit. The stranger's breath tasted like pennies and pine sap. He whispered a rule nobody sane would want. Don't pray to the moon unless you want an answer. Elias had said he didn't believe in answers. The stranger laughed. Good, belief wastes time. The fever dragged a line down Elias's spine and poured mercury through it. Vertebrae lifted, counted themselves, then settled wrong. He choked on a vowel that didn't exist anymore. He went to his knees. The mud accepted him like family. He raised his head to the water, and the water lifted a head of its own. The reflection was a second ahead now, eyelids late, mouth early, an animal reading his thoughts and deciding which ones were edible. Make it stop, he told it. It grinned with new geometry. Something crowded his teeth from behind. Too many. Each found a place the old him had never needed. The roof of his mouth sharpened. His tongue discovered a language of hunger with only one verb. He crawled to the airboat again and found the knife. Its handle felt small, like it belonged to a memory of a boy who'd believed metal could solve what blood could not. He pressed the blade against his forearm. The red that came wasn't human red. It was dusk. It smelled like the first minute after thunder. He laughed, a broken zipper sound, and the trees shivered as if the laugh were contagious. What would you carve away to keep your mind? Name one thing you'd give up before the moon takes the rest. Wind moved, but the leaves didn't. The wind was inside him, trying doors. His ears stretched toward a sound he couldn't admit. Footsteps on water. Not possible. Then again, neither was his wrist joint turning twice before it stopped. Dogs, closer now. Men too. A radio crackle, a code number that felt like a last name. Floodlight beams combed the mist, shearing it into white curtains. Elias tasted their batteries, their boot polish, the pepper of their nerves. He did not want to. Wanting had been taken away. He looked up at the moon and saw it pulsing, not with light, but with an intention. The stranger hadn't bitten him. The swamp had, through a borrowed mouth. All at once the fever kissed the final hinge inside him and said, now. Bones folded. Not broken, repurposed. Ribs opened like hands learning prayer. Shoulders dislocated in a way no man should survive, and then found a second skeleton waiting behind the first to welcome them home. A sound like wet rope twisting filled his head. It was his spine practicing a new curve. He put the knife down because claws made more sense. Hair rose in a tide, first at the nape, then washing forward, drowning the familiar topography of him. His nose broke with relief, then lengthened to find a wind that had always been there. The world arrived in layers he'd never paid for. Copper rain far away, hot plastic near the boats, the private map of every lawman's sweat. He tried to think, stop, but the word burst into a flock of small, black birds that flew straight into the trees and died. Another word took its place, run. He stood, not man-tall, not wolf-low, new. Water reached for him and missed. The fever receded the way a crowd steps back to let the fighter through. He listened. The swamp listened back, and this time they agreed. From the curtain of fog a hound broke first, brave or unlucky. It halted, whimpered once, recognized a rule written before dogs made friends with fire and tried to unsee him. Too late. Elias's new mouth wrote a sentence across the night. It contained no language, just permission. He moved. The airboat rattled on its moorings as if applauding a crime. He crossed 10 yards without choosing to, learned how the knee bends when it stops being a knee, how the shoulder turns when it becomes a weapon. Somewhere a man shouted a name, and the name dissolved on the ground like salt. He reached the nearest tree and carved a line down its face with one curious swipe. Sap bled sweet. He tasted it and knew the age of storms in its rings. He knew the path the gators preferred and the hollow under the island roots where bones rested patiently. He knew where to go, not because he remembered, but because the swamp did. Behind him, radios crackled into prayer. Ahead, the reeds parted like they had orders. He should have felt triumph, terror, grief, anything human to prove he was still on our side of the door. Instead, he felt the clock in the moon and the lock in his chest turning together. Micro loop close. The reflection in the water arrives a beat early again. This time it's smiling with his mouth. The first thing Elias noticed about hunting as a monster was how quiet it was. Predators in stories snarl and roar. But out here, even the frogs shut up for him. He could feel their hearts through the mud. Every pulse a drumbeat he didn't remember signing up for. He moved between cypress trunks like smoke learning to walk. Far behind, the floodlight still prowled, white squares bobbing over the black water. Men in uniforms, guns, names stitched to their chests. Authority. He could smell the metal, gun oil, and nervous sweat, stronger than any badge. He should have run the other way. But hunger doesn't run. It leans towards sound. He watched the nearest man pause. Check his watch, mumble into a radio. The airboat motor idled. Its fan coughed once. Elias tilted his head. The noise painted him a map. 12 men, 2 dogs. One river of fear running through all of them. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, every inch of him learning its new machinery. When the first man saw him, he saw a question, the kind that ends careers. A silhouette too long in the arms, too low in the hips, eyes burning the same color as the moon's reflection. The man raised his light. The beam found fur slick with sweat and river water, and then the beam found nothing, just air and sound. A rush like wind in a cave followed by the thud of someone remembering what dying felt like. The radio hissed, Unit 3. Come in. He didn't count how many fell. Counting belonged to the old Elias. This new creature measured only in noise, how many screams it took before the swamp sounded peaceful again. The dogs fled first, smart enough to know an old god when they smelled one. The men tried to follow, boots slipping, light beams crossing like desperate prayers. Each splash was a sentence, and he edited ruthlessly. Then the world folded in on itself for a moment. He could hear her, the reflection. Don't stop now. The swamp wants more. He shook his head, but his body nodded for him. He stepped over a body, no name, no guilt. Just a vessel emptied back into the mud. The airboat drifted, light still spinning. Music from the lawman's radio leaking out in a soft country lullaby about forgiveness. Elias almost laughed. Forgiveness was for things that could still choose. When the last gun fell silent, the swamp spoke again. Bubbles, croaks. Rain starting slow. It smelled of blood and iron and satisfaction. He crouched at the water's edge and looked for himself. The reflection came late this time. It smiled wider than the mouth above it, you see. It said without words, "You're what you were meant to be." He wanted to deny it, to argue that monsters need permission. But the water didn't listen, and the night didn't care. He turned away and began to walk. No, stalk through the fog. Every root and vine seemed to bow, clearing a path deeper into the heart of the swamp. Somewhere out there, a houseboat lamp flickered, human voices, survivors, witnesses. He felt his stomach knot in two, half fear, half appetite. If you're still breathing, it means the hunt isn't done. Subscribe before the next heartbeat, or the swamp might choose you instead. He stepped onto solid ground again, barefoot, claws clicking against an old wooden dock. Every board creaked like an alarm. Inside the shack, someone whispered a prayer. Elias paused, head tilted, listening to the rhythm of words he used to believe. "Deliver us from evil," the voice said. He opened the door and answered with a sound no scripture covered. Outside, the water calmed. For a moment, all was still. Then the reflection surfaced again, alone, whispering one word to the moon: "Run." The moon drifted behind cloud and the swamp exhaled. Every echo folded back into itself. The air thickened until breathing felt like swallowing history. Elias stopped moving. The body he wore, half stolen, half gifted, shivered as if remembering cold. He should have been drenched in blood, but the swamp had drunk it first. It left him clean, a newborn in filth. "What do you want from me?" he muttered. The cypress answered. Its bark peeled in long, wet strips, exposing shapes that were almost faces. One by one, the trunks began to glow from within. Soft amber pulses rising like swamp gas, lanterns made of memory. He saw figures inside the light, a woman in a torn wedding dress sinking beneath lily pads. A child crouched on a root, eyes blank with moonlight, a hunter loading silver shells that melted in his hands. Each flickered, replaying their last moments again and again, loops of confession trapped in sap. He stepped closer. The nearest face looked up at him. Her eyes were his. "We were all you once." He staggered back, hitting another trunk. The glow crawled up his shoulder, burned without heat, filled his head with noise. "Stop it, stop it!" But the swamp didn't obey. The vision surged. Every drop of water became a mirror. Every mirror became a mouth. The lawman he'd torn apart knelt beside the drowned bride. The stranger from the roadhouse leaned in, eyes flickering gold to black, black to something deeper. "This place remembers everything it eats," the stranger said, "and it eats in your shape now." Elias tried to run, but the ground was a lung. Each step sank him deeper until water reached his waist. Beneath the surface, hundreds of hands reached up, some human, some not. Each hand bore the same scar he did, a crescent bite mark, glowing dull red. He screamed, and the swamp screamed back. Not in mockery, in harmony. Every living thing around him joined the chorus: frogs, birds, wind, even the hum of insects reborn from corpses. The sound built until the moon emerged again, white and merciless. He lifted his arms to block it and saw the light shining through the webs of sinew between his fingers. His flesh had become translucent, showing the machinery underneath, the beast's design mapped in veins and bone. "You are the echo," a reflection said from every puddle. The next verse in a song older than language. He fell forward into the water and sank through layers of temperature, each colder than the last. Down there, beneath the roots, he found the archive, skeletons wrapped in vines, skulls fused with branches, bones etched with symbols no human tongue could shape. They glowed faintly, murmuring in voices made of bubbles. He reached out to one and felt knowledge crawl up his arm like fireflies, visions, moons rising over centuries, wolves with eyes like priests, villages drowned to keep secrets, 1,000 transformations, each believing it was the first. He understood then the swamp wasn't cursed. It was curating. Every monster it birthed was a verse in its scripture, and now the scripture had a new author. He kicked upward, breaking the surface in a shower of rot and starlight. The world felt rewritten. The swamp was no longer around him. It was inside him, adjusting its grip. Somewhere to the east, dawn waited like a lie. He crawled to the bank, coughing water and centuries. The reflection surfaced beside him, patient as ever. "Do you see it now?" Elias nodded, though the motion wasn't entirely his. "What happens to me?" The reflection smiled with all the mercy of a flood. "You continue. Every place remembers what it kills. Tell me what your home would whisper if it could speak." The light faded. The faces in the trunks closed their eyes. The water calmed. Only one sound remained, the slow turning of the moon in the sky, grinding like a key in an ancient lock. Micro-loop, close. Elias looked at his reflection. For the first time, it didn't move at all. He did. The first light of dawn crawled over the swamp like a thief who'd lost his courage halfway. It didn't brighten anything. It only revealed where the dark was hiding. Elias blinked against the pale fog. His eyes burned, pupils tightening to the new world's cruelty. For a heartbeat, he thought he could still smell himself, human, sour with fear. Then the scent was gone, drowned beneath the iron tang of last night's work. He tried to stand. His legs argued. The swamp wanted to keep him, mud clutching at his ankles with the tenderness of a mother that never learned how to let go. He tore free and felt the skin of his feet stay behind like an offering. The cypress trees watched him limp toward a distant line of brightness. The road, the border between folklore and paperwork. He could almost hear the whine of traffic somewhere beyond the mist. Civilization, engines and headlines, coffee, consequence. If he reached it, maybe he could pretend. The thought made him laugh, low and broken. The laughter drew company. Something moved parallel to him, invisible but rhyming his steps. At first he thought it was his echo. Then he saw the ripples in the water bending inward, like gravity had changed its mind. Don't. The voice came from everywhere, branches, blood. He turned and saw himself standing 20 feet away, or what the swamp thought he looked like. Smoother, calmer, perfected. The reflection had climbed out of the mirror. It smiled. You were supposed to stay. Elias backed up. The mud hissed between his toes. I'm done. You said continue. I choose how. The copy tilted its head, amused by the grammar of resistance. Choice ends where the moon begins. Then it moved. They met like storms colliding. Elias swung first. Instinct. Desperation. The blow landed with a sound like wet bark tearing. The copy didn't flinch. It split down the middle and both halves kept coming. He realized too late that fighting the swamp's memory was like punching the water. You only make more of it. He ran. Branches snapped behind him, echoing his heartbeat exactly one step late. The world pulsed to the same rhythm, roots rising, vines reaching. The swamp didn't want to kill him. It wanted to keep him. A human thought broke through the noise. The road. He could see it now, a thin ribbon of dirt turned to gold by morning sun. A parked pickup. An open door. Salvation wearing yesterday's dust. He pushed harder. The ground solidified underfoot. Birds returned to their trees, cautious witnesses, each step lighter, each breath more human. The claws retracted, reluctant. His shoulders cracked inward, rearranging toward mercy. He stumbled onto gravel, naked and shivering, body steaming in the cold light. Behind him, the swamp ended abruptly, as if an invisible wall divided myth from morning. He laughed again, softer this time. A sound answered from the mist, his own laughter, but wrong, lower, hungrier. The reflection stepped out of the fog, still perfect, still smiling. It stopped at the border where the mud met gravel and looked down at its feet, as though the rules were written there. You'll come back, it said. They always do. Elias turned toward the truck. The keys were in the ignition. A small mercy or a trap. He climbed in, hands shaking, eyes catching every shift of shadow in the rearview mirror. He started the engine. The swamp shivered. Run from the moon, Elias. The tires spun mud and blood into a single color. The road stretched ahead, endless, ordinary. He pressed the pedal and didn't look back until the trees were only memory. But when he did, the reflection was running beside the truck, matching speed inside the window glass. Its mouth moved, soundless, until the words appeared in his mind. You can't escape what remembers you. Share this, if you've ever tried to outrun what you are. The swamp's listening. The mirror of the truck vibrates with the rhythm of his pulse. For a second, two faces stare back, one breathing, one smiling. Then the road bends and the reflection keeps driving. Daylight should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like exposure. A raw, white interrogation lamp that asked too many questions. Elias drove until the road lost its accent of mud. The truck rattled over bridges and blacktop, the swamp shrinking behind him into rumor. Every mile, he expected to see flashing lights, hear sirens, find something human chasing him. But nothing came, only the smell did. Wet leaves, rot, blood. It clung to him like guilt with a pulse. He stopped at a gas station 30 miles out. A bell rang when he pushed through the door. The clerk barely looked up. Just another lost soul in another lost hour. Rough night, the man asked. Elias tried to smile. His lips obeyed, but his teeth felt foreign. Too many in the wrong places. Yeah, he said. His voice cracked in a register he didn't recognize. He went to the restroom, splashed water on his face, and met the mirror like an old enemy. The reflection looked fine. Too fine. No scars. No mud, no blood. Not even the bite mark. He touched his neck. Nothing. He touched the glass. The reflection didn't follow. Thought you left me behind, didn't you? The voice didn't come from the mirror. It came from the drain. Water began to swirl upward against gravity, forming a dark coil that shimmered with familiar amber light. He stumbled backward. The faucet burst open, spraying black water that smelled like the swamp's breath. From its depths, a shape formed, his reflection again, but smaller, hungrier, its eyes glinting with swamp light. Elias grabbed the sink, heart thundering. "You're not real." The voice laughed like bubbling mud. "Neither are you." He slammed his fist into the mirror. The glass shattered, water spilling out like blood. When he looked up, every shard showed a different version of him. One smiling, one snarling, one already gone. The clerk knocked on the door. "You okay in there?" Elias froze. The shards kept whispering. "Let him in," one said. "Feed it forward." He scooped up the pieces and threw them into the sink, trembling. When he looked up again, there was only one reflection left, his, but its mouth was still moving. He left cash on the counter and drove away, the sky bruised toward sunset. His hands shook on the wheel. Every vibration of the road felt like heartbeat inside bone. He pulled over by a field, got out, and listened. Wind moved through the grass, whispering in a language he didn't know but somehow remembered. He knelt, pressed his hand to the dirt. It pulsed, faint but steady. The swamp hadn't stayed behind. It had followed. He drove on through towns and gaslights, every puddle on the roadside reflecting not him, but that other face, waiting, smiling, sometimes mouthing, "Come home." He couldn't tell if he was dreaming the daylight now, or if the night was still happening somewhere underneath it. "The swamp doesn't end where it's wet," the stranger's voice murmured in his head. "It ends when you stop pretending you're dry." He didn't sleep, couldn't, because every time his eyes closed, he heard frogs singing in the distance, and one note, deeper, carried on their rhythm, his name. If you've ever taken something home that wasn't meant to leave, mark this story with a like. Seal the door before it opens again. In a roadside puddle, under neon light, a single ripple spreads outward, steady, patient. The reflection that stares back grins wider than the frame allows. By the time night rose again, the horizon had drowned, no stars, no moon. Just that faint, swamp-colored glow clinging to the edges of the world like rot on fruit. Elias drove until the fuel light blinked red, then let the truck roll to silence on the shoulder of a forgotten highway. He sat there, listening to the engine cool, the metal tick. The insects rehearsed their hymn. "I'm out," he whispered. But the road didn't believe him. Far across the asphalt, mist drifted up from the drainage ditch, thin, deliberate, alive. It carried voices, not one, dozens, hundreds. Each syllable dragged a memory from him, the gunfire, the dogs, the stranger's yellow eyes. The reflections smile. They weren't hunting him anymore. They were calling him home. He stepped out, barefoot, gravel biting through skin that refused to bleed. Every puddle along the road lit up with faces, men, women, shapes too warped to name, all wearing his hunger. "All waiting. Why me?" he shouted. "Why not let me forget?" The nearest reflection tilted its head, because forgetting is how it spreads. The puddles began to shimmer in sequence. A heartbeat passed from one reflection to the next, forming a chain down the endless road. He saw cities inside them now, windows, alleyways, phone screens, comment sections, each carrying that same faint amber flicker. The swamp didn't need water anymore. It had found a new medium, us. He fell to his knees as the chorus rose. Every sound, truck radio static. Far off tires, the creak of his bones, aligned into rhythm. The howl built from nothing, began low, climbed through ribs, into throat, through sky. When it burst free, it wasn't a scream. It was an invitation. Lights across the highway flickered. Phones in the pockets of sleeping strangers lit up at once, their black screens rippling with reflections that smiled before the cameras turned on. 1,000 watchers catching a glimpse of themselves just a little too late. Elias's reflection stepped out of the nearest puddle. Whole now, almost kind. It placed a hand on his shoulder. "You ran from the moon," it said. "Now you'll run with it." He didn't resist when the claws came back, didn't scream when his spine remembered its other language. The road bent, the night bent. He stood, taller, clearer, less man, more message. Every pack needs a storyteller. He turned toward the camera of the world, toward us, and smiled the way the swamp had taught him. Patient, knowing, hungry. At Whispering Narratives, we don't just tell stories. We open doors to the shadows. Subscribe before the next full moon. If you still believe you can run, confess below what the swamp whispered to you, and share this if you're ready to let someone else hear it calling. Swamp remembers its own, and now it remembers you.